A water bearer in India had two large pots, each hung on the end of a pole which he carried across his neck. One of the pots had a crack in it. And while the other pot was perfect and always delivered a full portion of water at the end of the long walk from the stream to the master's house, the cracked pot arrived only half full. For a full 2 years, this went on daily, with the water bearer delivering only 1.5 pots of water to his master's house. Of course, the perfect pot was proud of its accomplishments, but the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its own imperfections and miserable that it was only able to accomplish half of what it had been made to do. After 2 years of what it perceived to be a bitter failure, it spoke to the water bearer one day by the stream. "I am ashamed of myself, and I want to apologize to you." "But why?" asked the water bearer. "What are you ashamed of?" "I have been able for these past few years to deliver only half my load because of this crack in my side, which causes the water to leak out all of the way back to your master's house because of my flaws. You have to do all of this work and you don't get the full value for your efforts," the pot said. The water bearer heard this and felt sorry for the old cracked pot, and in his compassion he said, "As we return to the master's house, I want you to notice the beautiful flowers along the path." And indeed, as they went up the hill, the old cracked pot looked and took notice of the sun warming the beautiful wildflowers on the side of the path. And this cheered it some. But at the end of the trail, it still felt bad because it had leaked out half of its load. And so it again apologized to the bearer for its failure. The water bearer said to the pot, "Did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of the path, but not on the other pot's side? That is because I have always known about your flaw, and I took advantage of it. I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, and every day while we walked back from the stream, you've watered them. And for 2 years, I've been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate my master's table. Without you being just the way you are, he would not have this beauty to grace his house." Each of us has our own unique flaws. We are all cracked pots. Ralph Waldo Emerson has said there's a crack in everything God has made. All of existence is flawed, broken. For Christians, this manifests in what they call original sin. It's a tricky concept, even semantically, as there's a significant distinction between little s sins and capital S, original sin. Little s sins are about behavior, while capital S sin is about existence. It's about being broken, flawed, having a crack. But it is easy to mix these two ideas together and to somehow see our brokenness as our fault, as something to feel guilty for, but that is not a fair rendering of the Christian doctrine of original sin. Even if you are a Christian, believe in original sin, it's important to notice that it's not that we're bad. It's that we're broken. There's a crack in everything that God has made. I remember a children's story that had been a favorite of mine by Shel Silverstein called The Missing Piece. Now, I used this story once as the jumping off point for a major theology presentation when I was in seminary. The story tells of a Pac-Man-like circle with, a slice missing, like a piece of pie that's missing just one piece of pie, missing just the one piece. And the opening lines of this story read, "It was missing a piece, and it was not happy. So it set off in search of its missing piece." The story then tells about the adventures it has along the way in this search and the complications that it encounters when it finds what it thinks it's after. It's when it finally found its missing piece and the complications that came from it, and maybe it's not exactly the right piece, and the decision that it finally makes to just remain broken. You see, when it finally found its missing piece, the one that actually fit, after all that searching and making up little songs about the searching and discovering the wrong piece again and again, it finally found its missing piece that was a geometrically whole circle. And thus, there was no opening through which it could sing. So it decided it was better to sing of the longing to be whole than it was to actually be whole. It decided to remain broken so that it could sing. Blackbirds singing in the dead of night, take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arrive. And so I would speak today of the benefits of being broken, as if there's any other way to be. There's a crack in everything God has made, and it's through that crack that the light shines. It's through that crack that we can offer our gift, that we can sing. It's the blackbird singing in the dead of night with broken wings that learn to fly and sunken eyes that learn to see. It's the amazing grace of having been lost and found blind, but able to see into the light of the dark black night. That children's story that I offered, The Missing Piece, I used it to begin my theological presentation that day in seminary, but it was not a presentation on some general aspect of theology, such as human nature or faith and suffering. It was a presentation on my personal theological journey. I was missing a piece, and I was not happy. So I had set off in search of my missing piece into the light of the dark black night. And my experience was very much like the paradoxical lyrics there of Paul McCartney's poetry. To find the light within myself, I sat with that dark black night of my brokenness. Notice that McCartney has done something really interesting with his poetry here. So often we talk of the dark black night as something negative, something bad. But in the song, Paul McCartney says we fly into the light of the dark black night. There's this profound paradox that's happening in these words, just as there is a profound healing to be found there. It's where the grace resides. For me, I looked into my heartache, my depression, until I found the mix of love and fear that was at its root. And then I turned toward my suffering rather than away from it. Back in the early 1970s, Henry Nouwen wrote a really powerful book called The Wounded Healer. The book quickly became kind of standard for pastoral theology. The premise of the title is that in our brokenness, we can become sources of life for others. The bulk of the book, however, is centered around a critique of society, a critique of the culture around us. Henry Nouwen said that we live in a dislocated world, a fragmented society, a rootless generation, and that we are hopeless and lonely and isolated as people. Nouwen said that we are driven apart by these forces in our culture. Healing comes from a radical stance of hospitality, a welcoming in. It's a standing forth, a presenting yourself with all that you are and inviting others in. Suffering is certainly solitary work. Each of us experiences suffering. There's a unifying community of sufferers, to be sure. We all suffer, and thus are kin in this. Yet each person's heartache and pain is unique to that person and is experienced inwardly. Howard Thurman, reflecting on this idea, has written, "Suffering tends to isolate the individual. It creates a wall. It makes his spirit miserable in the literal sense of the word. Initially, it stops all outward flow of life and makes a virtue of the necessity of turning inward." Thurman later adds, "Openings are made in a life by suffering that are not made in any other way. Initially, it isolates, it creates a wall, but then it offers an opening." Maya Angelou writes, "No one knows what it costs the bulb, the onion bulb, or the tulip bulb to split, to crack itself open, to allow the thin tendril of life to emerge. Certainly, there is pain and suffering involved, but the brokenness is an opening through which greater depth of joy and meaning can arise." As Khalil Gibran wrote, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked. The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy it can contain." This is not to say that suffering is always an opportunity to grow into joy or new life, only that it can, that it is an opportunity. I'm not preaching about the saving power of suffering, as if suffering is some great good for our spiritual growth. Indeed, I think our capacity for joy is a greater agent for spiritual growth than suffering ever has been. And besides, I'm speaking more of brokenness than I am of suffering. Our brokenness, my brokenness, is a source of power and beauty. It can be an opening for grace. It is a crack through which so much compassion and understanding can flow. It can cause me suffering, my brokenness, when I work to hide my flaws and to be ashamed of them, when I allow myself to be limited by my failures, or I could grow. Runner Marie Rilke has said the purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things. At times, I will playfully say that my hope is to eventually make new and more glorious mistakes rather than simply repeat the same old tired mistakes I'm used to. Life is full of opportunities to either be held back by that wall or to find the opening. Like the circle who was missing a piece. The end goal is not to reach perfection. It's to learn how best to make use of the brokenness. You are full of flaws and failings, sufferings and sorrows, yet you also have so much to offer. And your gifts are available, not just in spite of your brokenness, but oftentimes because of it. I had a professor when I was in undergraduate school studying theater. And this professor would talk not about acting or set design or directing even, but about life as an artist. He was a bit of an odd duck. He had this philosophy that if you knew who you are, if you know who you are as an artist, everything else will fall in place. You grow used to finding folks like this when you're in theater. But there was this one lesson in particular that I found then and still find now to be of great value. He was talking one day about the role of suffering in the life of the artist. He said, it's important to name and know your own pain that you've experienced. This way, for example, when you're getting into character as an actor, you can relate to your character's hurts and sufferings by saying, I know that fight. I've been through that fight, or something similar to it. This image of talking about our sufferings in life as fires that we've lived through, it stuck with me. And when I switched my major from theater to psychology, it still made a lot of sense. And then when I went through seminary in training to become a minister, this idea that we all have been through fires that have burned and informed us has taught me much about empathy and how to interact with other people. And it's an analogy that seems to fit better and better the more I think of it and live with it. It leads us toward compassion. The broken places in my life and in my heart can reveal grace and often wisdom through which there is understanding, and that compassion can flow. According to Henry Nouwen, we live in this dislocated and isolating world. Healing comes from this radical stance of hospitality, a welcoming in. It's a holding forth with all that you are and inviting others in. It's not about fixing another person's brokenness. Rather, it's about welcoming another person, flaws and all, to be present with you. There's a poem from May Sarton that illustrates this so well that I'll offer here as I wind my way toward the end. She advises us to move among the tender with an open hand. She says this: true gardeners cannot bear a glove between the sure touch and the tender root, must let their hands grow knotted as they move with a rough sensitivity about under the earth between the rock and the shoot, never to bruise or wound the hidden fruit. And so I watched my mother's hands grow scarred, she who could heal the wounded plant or friend. With the same vulnerable yet rigorous love, I minded once to see her beauty gnarled, but now her truth is given me to live. As I learn for myself, we must be hard to move among the tender with an open hand and to stay sensitive up to the end. Pay with some toughness for a gentle world. Henry Nouwen contends that even in our brokenness, we can become a source of healing for others. Howard Thurman witnesses that openings are found through our brokenness that are not found in any other way. And if we can learn to move among the thorns without a glove, May Sarton observes, we can stay sensitive to another person's brokenness. There's a crack in everything God has made. We are all cracked pots. Do not despair for that within you which feels lost or sunken or broken, or feels like a weight holding you back. Maybe the other side of the coin of your great gift to offer the world. You can still learn to fly, though you have wings that are broken. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see amazing grace. You were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly into the light of the dark black night. At least thus it has been with my experience of life. May it be so for you as well. A world without end. May it be so.